What's going on, Packer fans? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can always follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. We are officially in the thick of it. We are down to 14 teams. By the time Green Bay plays next, at worst, there will be 8 teams left. At best, there will be 5 teams left, depending on when they play next or the following weekend. But it just feels like we are at that point in time where there is no dull moment. There is a ton of stuff going on. And there was no change in that in any way, shape, or form on Monday. A ton of news and notes surrounding the league. Of course, it was Black Monday and a lot of head coaches gone. We'll get into that in just a moment. Green Bay had some big news on the injury front, which is great news, which we'll get into in just a moment. Had the opportunity to get to my offensive grades as well, so we'll go through that. Nathaniel Hackett news, transactions, just all of it. So like usual this time of year, there is no lack of conversation topics, so I will jump in right away and get to as many as I possibly can. Let's start with the great news. Za'Darius Smith apparently will be back, will practice this week, and has a legitimate chance to play in the divisional round. We heard that reported from Ian Rappaport. Matt Schneidman also had a source on it. We also heard from Za'Darius Smith. He posted a hype video on Instagram that he's back. So I've said all along, I'll believe it when I see it. It certainly seems like we're going to see it, and I'll be able to believe it, and you'll be able to believe it. And it's amazing news. There's no two ways about it. Now, Matt LaFleur did throw a little bit of a wet blanket on things and say, hey, he literally said, quote, I want to temper expectations. And I think that's fair, right? Because as Matt LaFleur mentioned, he hasn't practiced since before the New Orleans game. And right now they just want to get him back at practice and see what he can handle. And who knows, right? Like you have to be able to get through practices and show that you're capable of playing and show that you're in game shape and all of those sort of things. So there's nothing quite yet to say that Z's going to come back and practice and be ready to play by the divisional round. We just simply don't know that at this point. But we did get confirmation from Matt LaFleur that Za'Darius Smith is going to practice this week. And that is just such a huge piece of news, because if they do get him back, I don't care if he's 70% of himself. That is a huge bonus for this Packers defense. And let's just kind of go over what it means in a couple different ways. I've probably gone over it, but in at least some capacity, but I feel like one of the lesser told stories of this season is just how much Green Bay has missed Za'Darius Smith and then Whitney Mercilus, and really just the depth at this outside linebacker position. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith playing good football, but there are those times where Preston and Rashawn go out at the same time, and all of a sudden you're bringing in Jonathan Garvin and Tipa Galeai. Now, both are coming off pretty good games against Detroit. However, Jonathan Garvin is my lowest graded player on the year. I haven't graded him for Week 18 on the defensive side yet, so maybe he improves, and that's not the case. But going into Week 18, he was my lowest graded player on the season, and Tipa has struggled some as well. And you can just see the degradation, if you will, of the play on the field, and especially on the edges when Preston and Rashawn Gary go out and those two come in. And again, that's not a knock on those two. There's not a lot of Rashawn Garys and Preston Smiths hanging around. But Whitney Mercilus showed that he was more than up to the task when he was in there. And of course, if you have Za'Darius Smith, in a perfect world, he's probably your 1A as a pass rusher, right? So there's a pretty big drop off there. And I don't know that we could expect, Z to play any significant role, but if he's taking 20, 25-ish snaps, maybe even 15, somewhere in there, from Tipa and Garvin, and like playing pretty solid football, that has the ability to be a big improvement and can legitimately help the defense. So first of all, going from those two to potentially more Z is a opportunity for a huge increase in the level of play that you put on the field on defense. If he's anything like himself, and all of a sudden by the NFC Championship game or something like that, he's able to play 40 snaps and he looks like Za'Darius Smith from 2020, or heaven forbid 2019, look the heck out. But if he's anything like himself, now you're really cooking with gas. And I think the biggest thing, outside of the fact that you're potentially taking snaps from Tipa and Jonathan Garvin, two players who have maybe been two of your lower performers, and putting in Z in those situations, well, you also have the fact that if you need to get to the quarterback, to me, the quickest way is still from point A to point B, and that's over the center. And we know that Za'Darius Smith has the ability to rush over center or at the defensive tackle position with his hand in the ground and quickly win and get penetration on the quarterback. And if you're looking to get penetration, and if you're looking to get quick pressure on the quarterback, there's no better way than with Kenny Clark and Za'Darius Smith inside and Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith on the outside. That still has the ability to be an incredible pressure package just with 4 guys for Green Bay, with Devondre Campbell at inside linebacker, potentially Jair Alexander in the slot with Rasul Douglas and Stokes on the outside, Amos and Savage back at safety. You can play another, corner, whether that be Kevin King or Shannon Sullivan. In dime, you can play Chris Barnes in your more base pat. Like, the sky is the limit. And if they get all those players back in that, in a, even, I don't even want to say significant capacity, but like if Jair and Zeke can just play, 25, 30 snaps of solid football, they are going to legitimately help this team quite a bit, because it's not even that they're playing up to their tier 1A level, right? It's that you're taking some of your guys that are some of your lowest performers, and you're taking them off the field and replacing them with Jair and Za'Darius and so on and so forth. So it has the ability to be a huge benefit for Green Bay. And again, what an unbelievable 180 from last year, where right before the playoffs, you learned that Bakhtiari is going to miss the playoffs. And this year, you learned that Bakhtiari and Myers and, just everyone, right? Randall Cobb, Za'Darius Smith, Jair Alexander, Josh Myers, like all of them may potentially be coming back. It is quite the 180, I should say. And it's just such, it has to buoy the spirits of this team and just give them that much more of a shot in the arm to say, hey, we can go out and win this. We are getting exactly healthy at exactly the right time. And again, I didn't think that Z was going to get to this point. It seems like he will be. We'll see what practice brings this week, but just massive, massive news on the ZaDarius Smith front going into the start of this week, as they have technically a bye week, but will practice later on in this week. Also good news, sounds like there's a chance that Billy Turner could practice this week. So they could get him back at practice and potentially could get him back for divisional or at least maybe NFC Championship game as well. Now, I've gone on record as saying, and actually I thought Dennis Kelly had another really great week this week. I think Dennis Kelly has quite easily outperformed, Billy Turner at this point. I just say it is what it is. I think Kelly's been really freaking good since he's got in. Now, I fully expect Billy Turner to be the starter at right tackle if he's healthy, and Dennis Kelly to go back to the bench. I didn't think I'd be saying this, to be totally honest, but just watching this game and seeing, Patrick and Newman struggle a little bit at right guard and seeing Dennis Kelly have another fantastic game, if Matt LaFleur is all in on top 5 guys, I'm not sold that it shouldn't be Bakhtiari and then John Runyon Jr., Josh Myers, and then potentially Billy Turner at right guard and Dennis Kelly at right tackle. Do I think they're going to go that way in any way, shape, or form? I really don't. But to me, that might be their best 5. Now, Myers struggled in this game, just a little bit more on that in just a moment. But and Matt LaFleur actually mentioned that he's, they're going to have to make some difficult decisions with guys coming back, but that he believes that Lucas Patrick is in their top 5, whether that be at guard or center. So I think he's going to be in there. And if I had to guess, I think it's going to go Bakhtiari, Runyon, and then Myers, Patrick, and then either Turner or Kelly. If Turner's healthy, it'll be Turner. If he's not, it would be Kelly. But man, it's going to be really interesting, the fact that they have that depth along the offensive line. I mean, you could have Dennis Kelly and Yosh Nijman and Royce Newman all of a sudden as your top backups on the offensive line, which is really crazy to think about the potential depth that they have if anyone does go down in any game, and the reps that all of those guys were able to get this year. Pretty stinking incredible. And I think, and I may have mentioned this before as well, but what all of these returns do, Jair Alexander and Randall Cobb and David Bakhtiari and potentially Billy Turner and Za'Darius Smith and just all of the players that are coming back, right? To me, what this does is it helps you answer the questions that every opposing team in the playoffs are going to ask in the upcoming playoffs. And what I mean by that is Green Bay is going to have 3 very tough opponents. I don't care who they play. I don't care if it's Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Tennessee. Like, I don't care who it is. They're going to have 3 very tough games of football. And obviously, I think it's going to be 3 much harder teams than that. But I don't care who it is. They're going to play 3 very tough games. And every team that they play from here on out is going to have players that are going to ask different questions of Green Bay, and Green Bay is going to have to figure out a way to answer those questions. And, whether that be Tom Brady, right? If you're playing Tom Brady, you don't want to have to rush more than 4 guys, and you need to get home with those 4 guys. Well, if Za'Darius Smith is back, having Za'Darius and Kenny Clark and Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith and those players to rush the passer with playing 7 behind and having Jair Alexander back there, that helps you answer a lot of those questions. Whether it's a team with a Nick Bosa like the San Francisco 49ers or DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons as edge rushers for the Cowboys, those are questions that are going to have to be asked of the Packers offensive line. And guess what? Having David Bakhtiari at one of those tackles and potentially Billy Turner back, or even if Dennis Kelly keeps playing the way that he is, Josh Myers at center, having those players back is going to help the Packers offensive line as they go against teams that ask those questions. Myers and I think Patrick playing right guard instead of Newman and Patrick playing his more natural position at guard will help you answer some of the questions against the Rams if you have to go against them and Aaron Donald. All right. If you're going against the Cowboys and you're facing CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, just like we saw the Vikings with Thielen and Jefferson in Minnesota a month and a half ago, that can cause some problems. But you all of a sudden get Jair Alexander back and are able to put Alexander on Cooper and, just give more attention to some of their star players. That's going to make things much harder, and you have the ability to answer those questions better. So regardless of, and Randall Cobb too, right? As we get into the playoffs and teams are going more bump and run and being more aggressive and getting away with more contact, you need guys who can separate specifically in the slot and just are on the same page with Aaron Rodgers. That Tampa game is a great example from last year, right? Those receivers had some struggles getting off of press coverage. Randall Cobb is going to help you answer some of those questions. It's all of them. All of these players coming back are going to help Green Bay navigate this playoffs. And no matter who they're playing against, they are now much better equipped because they got better on the offensive line. They're going to get better at receiver with Cobb coming back. They're going to get better on the pass rush and defensive front with Z coming back. They're going to get better in the secondary because of Jair. Everything, in every way, they're going to be better in some capacity due to all of these returns. All right, let's move on to some transactions. David Moore moves off the COVID list back to the practice squad. So a potential returner come playoff time is back in the fold. They also released Ben Braden off the roster, which seems a little bit surprising at first until you realize that they needed the roster spots as they start getting some of these guys back. And he will likely go back to the practice squad. At least that will be their goal. If he gets claimed, they will not be able to do that. Teams can claim him, and if he gets claimed, they wouldn't have until next season. I'd have to look at his contract, and there's all different things to look at there. But hopefully, fingers crossed, Green Bay can get him back on the practice squad. However, if they can't, we just talked about the fact that they're getting all these guys on the offensive line back, and you could be in a situation where, again, Runyon and Kelly and all the Yash and all these guys are now on the bench. The odds that you get to Braden in any capacity for the remainder of the season are pretty darn slim, knock on wood. And then they also released Chris Blair off the practice squad, somebody that has been on the team in some capacity for almost the entirety of the season. All right, we were not without news from the NFC North as well. From a Vikings standpoint, they let Spielman and Zimmer go, their GM and head coach. So they will be completely changing over that front office and coach. So that will be something, and coaching staff, I should say, that should be something to keep an eye on, certainly. The Lions let offensive coordinator Anthony Lynn go, so they'll be looking for a new OC. And then from a Bears standpoint, not only did they let Pace and Nagy go, but Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, but the press conferences that they had just announcing all this were just a total unmitigated nightmare, like making just unbelievable comparisons that they shouldn't have. I'm not even going to go into what it was, but just look into it if you want to. They also called out Olin Kreutz, one of their all-time greats, basically calling him a liar. This is supposed to be just a pretty status quo easy press conference. We're excited to go in a different direction. We're appreciative of Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace and the time that they gave us. We're really excited to be bringing in a new front office and a new coach that's going to re-energize and revigorate the Chicago Bears team. It should have been fairly simple, and it just ended up being a total train wreck. And if you haven't looked into it, I'm not going to go into it because this isn't a Bears podcast, but just be very happy that the Packers are the Packers and the Bears are the Bears, because the Bears are a train wreck right now, and from their roster to their front, all of it. They're going to get a new, front office, a new head coach. They need to hit that out of the park because that team and that ownership and all of it is a mess, and they need somebody to dig that out of them. Or if you're a Packer fan, which is why you're listening to this, just keep things exactly the way that they are. I did love the suggestions that I saw on Twitter. Just hire Matt Nagy in Minnesota, Mike Zimmer in Chicago. Everything's fixed. I love that idea, and I'm all in on it. Last couple pieces of news, Nathaniel Hackett has an interview set up later this week with the Jaguars, so we'll keep an eye on that. And then the Broncos also requested permission to speak with Hackett as well. So those are 2 openings that will in fact interview Hackett. There could be more down the road, but we know of 2 of them as of right now. Last piece of news, Luke Sampe from WFRV, weatherman, weather person, he mentioned that the weather for the divisional game is potentially looking incredibly cold, like the cold front that's been in Green Bay over the course of this last couple days. That could potentially be big news for Green Bay if you're playing a team from, LA, Arizona, Dallas, San Francisco. Those things could be a pretty big advantage as you're playing a warm weather team in negative temperatures. Hopefully that becomes an advantage for Green Bay. We will see. It's still a couple weeks away, so you never quite know, but the initial weather reports are calling for very cold weather come divisional round, whether it's on Saturday or on Sunday. Quickly finishing up my grades for this week on the offensive side of the ball. No surprise, Aaron Rodgers was still number 1 on offense. Jon Runyan was my number 2. I just think he's playing some really fantastic football right now. I think he's playing his best ball of the season, as is number 3, Allen Lazard. I think those 2 have really come into their own, and so is my honorable mention, Josiah DeGuara. You talk about 3 players who have played their best football over the course of the last month and a half. Jon Runyan, Allen Lazard, Josiah DeGuara, put all 3 of them on that list. You can put Kelly on that list as well, Dennis Kelly. He also graded as an honorable mention this week, very high grade. Like all 4 of those have played really well towards down the stretch, and depending on what happens with Turner, all 4 of them could hopefully continue that pace and really be for a group of 4 that really lifts this Packers offense as they start going into the playoffs. Speaking of which, my other honorable mention, David Bakhtiari, very high grade in this game. Just another David Bakhtiari-esque performance. Had a couple hiccups in the second quarter as he started to fatigue a little bit. Run block he'd like to have back, couple pass pros he'd like to have back, but man, he looked like David Bakhtiari, and I could not be more excited about how he looked coming off of ACL injury, completely coming in, cold, basically not having any snaps on the season. He looked great. And again, could not be more excited about how he looked in this game. Despite only 27 snaps, was still, I think, my 5th highest graded player on offense with a really, really high grade this week. So kudos to Bakhtiari. And then my bottom 3 players, Juwann Winfree, thought he struggled to get open, as well as the big fumble, of course, which was the huge error on his resume for the day. Amari Rodgers, of course, the bobbled interception. I know it was tipped, but that's still something he has to come up with. And I thought overall, he also failed to separate on more than one occasion. Yeah, I thought he was actually a pretty decent blocker, but overall, a pretty tough day for Amari. And then, yes, number 3 on my lowest graded Packers was Jordan Love. I think you can look at a couple of these plays and sort of give him some accident forgiveness based on some of the protection, the receivers not getting open. I will tell you and look you straight in the eye, this game is not anywhere near as bad for Love as what it may have seemed like. He actually had a neutral grade up until those last few drives or last couple drives. But I will say, I think even though he was pressured on the play, you still got to make a smart decision with the ball. You can't airmail a ball and an interception with the game on the line. So yeah, protection wasn't great. Receivers weren't getting separation, but you're still the guy in charge and pulling the trigger, and you got to find a way to avoid those mistakes. He didn't. And ultimately, he ended up with my 3rd lowest grade. Also had 3 other players with, fairly low grades in this game. MVS, I thought he had a rough game, really failed to separate even early in the game. Tyler Davis, I keep wanting to say Trevor Davis, but Tyler Davis, the drop touchdown, which it would have been a little bit of a tough catch, but I think he could have had it. Just one of his, not so great games. Had a couple other plays where wasn't holding up as a blocker. I thought as the game went on, he actually got much, much better. But first half especially really was a struggle for Davis. And then Royce Newman as well, also graded in the negative this week. That is going to do it for me. Make sure to check out these grades later in the week over on Packer Report. I believe I'm going to be right back here tomorrow with Rachel Hotmeyer, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.